The effects of high dietary omega 6 to omega 3 fatty acid ratios related to health outcomes. As a precursor, I want to say that I am in no way an expert on the topic, but since I have gone to medical school and I have a better understanding than most on how to read and interpret this kind of information, I feel comfortable enough to present some of this. First, I want to talk about how I got into this topic. One day I was scrolling through Reddit and there was a subreddit suggested to me called R Stop Eating Seed Oils. I was intrigued by the topic, so I started reading some of the discourse about it and gained a cursory understanding of the complaints that seed oils such as canola oil and soybean oil are high in omega 6 fatty acids and contribute to all sorts of chronic diseases because of this. However, I didn't really find too much great research being posted there. It was mostly anecdotal or random low grade evidence. So I wanted to do my own due diligence since I'm going to be a doctor in a few months. I went to PubMed and put in search terms such as seed oils, health outcomes, and was bombarded with articles covering a range of topics. Some of them were sort of relevant to what I was looking for, but this is where I realized how broad nutritional research can be. This can make it very intimidating to look into unless you know exactly how to find the type of information that you're looking for. Changing the terms to canola oil health gave me research into actual health benefits related to canola oil, which made me start to second guess whether this topic was even real or not. Like this review article, which summarizes research that canola oil actually reduces total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol levels, can improve insulin sensitivity, and even decrease platelet aggregation, which would benefit cardiovascular outcomes. Most people who hear that think that canola oil is ultimately good for you because it lowers the bad cholesterol and has positive metabolic effects. But these are ultimately snapshots into the grander picture of cardiovascular health and future development of chronic illness. While these conclusions are probably true, it does not include all the other effects that seed oils such as canola oil have been shown to do. I'm only pointing this out just to explain how sometimes people can start research with good intentions and be sent down a completely different path and conclusion than what is depicted by the entirety of the research. It was ultimately due to me Googling omega 3 and omega 6 ratios in health that I was able to find these three review articles, which summarize the pathophysiology and health outcomes very well. These sources are where I'm mostly going to be pulling my information from. But first, what are omega 3 and omega 6 fatty acids? These are classes of essential dietary polyunsaturated fatty acids that are derived from alpha linolenic acid and linoleic acid. Alpha linolenic acid creates molecules in the omega 3 fatty acid class, while linoleic acid creates molecules in the omega 6 fatty acid class. The main distinction between omega 3 and omega 6 fatty acids is purely based on the location of the first double bond between different points in their carbon chain. These are essential molecules, which means we are not able to synthesize them on our own and ultimately need to source them from our diets. They are responsible for a wide range of molecular processes and are building blocks for many important cellular functions. Intake of omega 3 metabolites, such as eicosapentaenoic acid, or EPA for short, and docosahexaenoic acid, DHA for short, was approximately 660 to 14,000 roughly milligrams a day, compared to just 100 to 200 milligrams a day today. Not only that, but the ratio of omega 6 to 3 has increased from 4 to 1 during Paleolithic times to 20 to 1 today. So ultimately, we're eating much more omega 6 compared to omega 3. And the metabolites of omega 3 that are good for us, which I'll go into, are much lower consumed today. This chart gives us a glimpse into some foods that have good omega 3 to 6 ratios, such as chia seeds and flax seeds, compared to foods that have historically very poor ratios of omega 3 to 6, such as corn oil, which has basically 1 gram of omega 3 to 52 grams of omega 6, or sunflower oil, which has almost 21 grams of omega 6 for every zero point 0.2 grams of omega 3. Why the ratio of omega 6 and omega 3 matters so much is because they're both competing for the same enzymes that metabolize them. mainly delta 6 desaturase, also known as fatty acid desaturase. Omega 6 is much better at binding to delta 6 desaturase, so when there's higher amounts of omega 6 being consumed, it doesn't give a chance for the omega 3 molecules to be metabolized in this pathway that leads to their active metabolites, which cause the beneficial decrease in inflammation. This is also why it's better to not just consume sources of high omega 3, but ideally, if you're going to supplement, you also want to be consuming the active metabolites such as EPA and DHA. This way, you're bypassing the enzyme competition. This increase in our food can also be directly measured based on how much is stored in our body. Since the 50s, researchers have measured an approximately 2.5-fold increase in linoleic acid, aka omega 6, that has literally been stored in our adipose tissue, or the fat of people in the United States. Now, the authors point out a correlation that this has paralleled the rise in numerous autoimmune, inflammatory, and allergic diseases as well, but we can't just go based on correlational data. We have to look at what's actually happening. As an exercise, I decided to go through my fridge and my pantry to find some items that have vegetable oils high in omega 6. This bottle of ranch literally has the first ingredient listed as vegetable oil. These brownies have soybean oil. This bag of popcorn that tries to advertise itself as a healthy alternative is literally made with a mix of sunflower oil and canola oil. You'll frequently see combinations of these oils listed in the ingredients list, which can be frustrating as a consumer because there's no way to tell the ratio of one oil over another. I never really knew what coffee creamer was, but I assumed it had to have cream as one of the main ingredients, but it literally has no cream at all. And soybean oil is, of course, the third ingredient, not to mention palm oil, which is associated with forced labor and deforestation of rainforests. You get the point. These oils are pretty much in most packaged goods that are being sold. I challenge you to go in your own pantry and fridge to see what items will have them. I bet it surprises you. Even if you try to supplement your omega 3 levels with classically abundant sources such as fish or eggs, modern farming practices are overall decreasing the amount of omega 3 fatty acids in these products. The omega 6 to 3 ratio of a free range chicken is 1.3, whereas a typical USDA egg has a 6 to 3 ratio of 19.9. Enriching their food with omega 3 definitively translates to improved ratios. So, what is it about omega 6 that's so bad? Omega 6 fatty acids are eventually converted into something called arachidonic acid, which is a precursor molecule for molecules called eicosanoids. As you can see in this chart, there's a bunch of different eicosanoids, but ultimately all you need to know is that these molecules have a major and essential role in modulating the amount of inflammation in our body, as well as thrombosis, which is related to the development of clotting in blood vessels. For an extra little tidbit, the enzyme cyclooxygenase is responsible for converting arachidonic acid to many of these eicosanoids. Drugs like ibuprofen, which is considered an NSAID, specifically targets one of these specific enzymes, which helps prevent the synthesis of those eicosanoids. This is the main mechanism of how ibuprofen reduces inflammation throughout the body, which can give pain relief. Likewise, EPA and DHA, which are derived from omega 3 fatty acids, pretty much do the exact opposite of what the downstream molecules of omega 6 do. It's decreasing these eicosanoids that increase inflammation and increase the amount of clotting in your blood vessels. Therefore, you would have a decrease of inflammation and a decrease of clotting. One thing I can tell you from medical school is that having chronic, long lasting inflammation throughout the body is associated with all sorts of chronic illnesses, such as diabetes, cancer, allergies, dementia, GI dysfunctions, etc. The list just goes on and on. You thought we were done there, but we're actually just getting started. This table beautifully summarizes how omega 6 and omega 3 work in essentially opposite functions to modulate levels of obesity. The first row is saying how arachidonic acid is activating certain cellular pathways that induce adipogenesis, which is basically the creation of new fat cells. EPA and DHA, the omega 3 derivatives, work to inhibit similar pathways that stimulate adipogenesis. So we're inhibiting the pathways that stimulate adipogenesis, therefore decreasing the amount of new fat that's being made. They also work on pathways that are used to create brown fat, which is utilized in energy regulation and metabolism. Brown fat is converted from white fat, and it's an important step to decrease the amount of overall fat in the body. The next row describes further information of how these molecules affect inflammation in the body. An important thing to note here is that having chronic inflammation contributes to the development of obesity. This creates a vicious cycle because being obese then also contributes to the level of background inflammation in the body. Next, it discusses how arachidonic acid increases insulin resistance, which is associated with the development of diabetes. It also increases leptin resistance. Leptin is a very important molecule that is utilized to signal our brain when we feel full. If there is resistance to this, it can lead to overeating and thus obesity. It also decreases the level of adiponectin, which is a molecule secreted from adipose tissue, aka fat cells, that is used to signal increasing metabolism of fat, as well as reducing inflammation and other great stuff. So we're lowering the amount of adiponectin that does this good stuff. As expected, EPA and DHA increase insulin sensitivity, which is good for the prevention of diabetes, and they increase the secretion of adiponectin. Arachidonic acid also increases the concentration of the molecules Ag and AEA, which modulate the endocannabinoid system. Admittedly, I am not super familiar with all the biochemical effects of this pathway, but the authors seem to say that it contributes to weight gain, larger adipocytes, and increased inflammation, whereas omega 3 decreases the amount of 2-AG and arachidonic acid in the brain, which improve the dysregulation of the cannabinoid system. Fascinatingly, there are studies that show that high intake of omega 6 while pregnant can increase the obesity of offspring. This has major implications for health outcomes down the line through lifetime. This may contribute to the direct correlation of obesity levels and increased dietary intake of omega 6 since the 1950s. I think I've explained enough in depth science for now about why high omega 6 levels are unhealthy. I'll just briefly go over some other effects related to health. There have been major studies that show that increased omega 3 fatty acids are effective in improving symptoms in patients with rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's and colitis, and dysmenorrhea, aka painful period cramps. There have been studies that show that increased exposure to omega 3 during pregnancy also results in reduced allergic diseases in offspring. This includes eczema, food allergies, and asthma. Of course, I had to throw in some research that showed how omega 3 supplementation can impact psychiatric disease. There is some early research that shows that omega 3 supplementation can be helpful in treating depression, bipolar disease, ADHD, schizophrenia, and even borderline personality disorder. I'll leave it here, but I can tell you for sure that there's lots more research out there that links all sorts of other chronic illnesses with high omega 6 foods. If you are interested in starting daily supplementation, here are some recommended brands. Ultimately, the best thing you can do for your health is to reduce the amount of high omega 6 foods in your diet. Cooking alternatives I would recommend would be well sourced extra virgin olive oil. Making sure that it's authentic olive oil is important because many food oil brands are not regulated and frequently mix seed oils into their products. This is especially rampant with avocado oil, which would be normally a decent option, but it's harder to find good brands. Obviously, this is all very difficult, and you still may not even have any desire to make any changes at all. But at the very least, being informed is the first step.